Hey there, and welcome again to another week of Bible study. Today we're going over the commission of Moses. Hope you like this week's Bible study. Okay, so now that we are here ready to go, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen and we'll get to start. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, so get your notes out and let's get into this. So today we're starting with what we call the commission of Moses. All right, pretty much all that means in short is how Moses got his mission to get started and how we're going to figure out how he became the face, the patriarch, the man that we know as one of the greatest prophets to ever live in our faith. So, without further ado, we're going to go over a quick recap over Genesis and everything that we went through. All right. So, these are pretty much all the Bible studies that we've already completed. So, we had creation, we had the fall of man, had the twins, or not the twins, but the brothers, Cain and Abel. We had Noah's Ark, we had the flood, we had the Tower of Babel, Abram to Abraham. We actually had three parts for that. We had the story of Isaac, we had the stories of Jacob and Esau, Jacob going to Israel. We finished it up with the story of Joseph, and now we are here in Exodus. Before we continue further, is there any questions from any of these stories that we passed by from the past before we jump into Moses? Anything that you felt like you didn't get a clear explanation about, or anything you still might have like a outstanding question about? Okay, so moving forward, we'll start with Exodus, the book. So if you're writing your notes, Exodus is broken down into two parts. Okay, so from chapters 1 to 18, this is the Exodus from Egypt. All right, so this is them leaving, getting exiles. That's what Exodus means. It's in exile. So being pretty much kicked out. Those are from chapters 1 through 18. Then the second part of it is from chapters 20 to 40, which is the 10 commandments and the blueprint for the future. Okay. Now, as this is happening, there is also chapter 19, which is the bridge. And it gets cut out because that is just the bridge for when he is getting the 10 commandments. Exodus follows Genesis a lot because it's both of them are broken down into two parts. Genesis is from chapters 1 to 11 for part 1, which is God and the world he created, and in part 2 is God and Abraham's family, all the way from chapters 12 to 50. Okay? So we're just building on that. All right? So if you're writing your notes, just I'll give you a second to get that down. Okay. Now, one thing to also note, Pharaoh. We've talked about this before when we were in Genesis. The term Pharaoh is just a title. Okay. Same thing with Abimelech. Those are all titles. All they mean is king. It's just the Egyptian way of saying king. All right. So anytime you see Pharaoh, Pharaoh's not just a certain person, it's the title. So instead of them saying kings, they just say our Pharaoh. He's our ruler, just like you would say your king is your ruler. Same thing. Um, but We get to this point where when this chapter opens up, we left Genesis where Joseph died and his descendants and his brother's descendants, they multiplied a lot. But in this new era, which is about 300 to 400 years later, there's a new pharaoh, which means there's a new family in charge. Okay. If we remember, one of the reasons why Joseph was able to become so big in Egypt in the past was because the pharaoh, the family that was in charge at that time, had very similar ancestors to the Hebrews. Okay. So they were also descendants of Ham and Shem, a different line in between the two. So they still had Semitic relations, meaning, hey, you're a distant cousin. So even though we're Egyptian by blood, we're still related. So even though Egyptians were xenophobic of the Hebrew people, or any foreigners for that matter, they were able to live and coexist with the Hebrew or the Israelites at this point in some type of peace. Remember, they didn't eat at the same table, they stayed separated. They didn't use the bathroom at the same place, they didn't eat at the same place. There's always a partition between them. Um, and one of the reasons why they didn't like farmers, okay? When Joseph told his family to come, he told them to stay in the land of Goshen, which was a city to the side of Egypt. It wasn't in Egypt, but it was to the side. However, during this 300 to 400 time frame, because of the famine and what was going on afterwards, over time, after Joseph had died and they periodically had famines from point to point, what the people started to do over time was they would sell their houses, they would sell their plot of land, they would sell, everything that they own in an attempt to buy more grain. So as time went on, this area of Goshen became a city state in a sense of Egypt. So now the Egyptian kingdom grew and now it included Goshen. At one point, it was its own thing just next to it. Now it became a city state within it. Now the Egyptians felt, hey, you're in our country and we don't want you here, pretty much. Okay. A lot of the Egyptians didn't feel like these farmers should share in the city with them. Okay. Now, when this new Pharaoh comes into rule, it brings in the same type of xenophobic mindset. And they pretty much say, hey, look, these dark Israelites, we do not want nothing to do with them. They shouldn't be in the same power or same level as Egyptians. This is Egypt, it's for us. We want them gone. So the new Pharaoh or the new Pharaoh family that would have came in, we have through scholars, we have literally, you know, made it to two different pharaohs, try to single them out. The first one is Ramses the second, and the second one will be Amenhotep the second. Now, we have a couple things that may kind of highlight why it may be, but it seems as in Amenhotep might be the actual king during that time. Um, but we see in verse 11, because of the way that they use slaves to build the cities, there's two cities being built, and Ramses the second was actually credited with building those cities. But at the same time, Amenhotep also was cited in 1 Kings 6:1, claiming that the Exodus took place 480 years before Solomon's temple was built. So it fits the timeline. And so most scholars go with Amenhotep as the pharaoh during this time. Now, regardless of whoever was the pharaoh, the main issue was they didn't want the Egyptians to they didn't want the Israelites to become too big as a nation. They said they were multiplying way too fast. We don't want them here. If we don't stop it, they will outnumber us. Now, usually before a new family comes in or a new regime, there's three ways that the succession of power would have happened in Egypt. All right. First way would have been hereditary, so a father to a son or to a heir, a parent, whether it be a cousin, a brother, a stepson, so on and so forth. Most of the time, they try to keep the bloodline pure, so they would marry within their sorry, they would marry within their family. Okay, so that's the first way. Second way is divine association. The pharaoh was known as the prophet of Ra or the incarnation of Ra. Okay, so he would claim that he was chosen by God through these religious ceremonies. Whoever got picked would be the next pharaoh when they didn't have an heir. So once they were picked, they would say, I am the little on earth representation of Ra. Anything Ra says, I said. And anything I said, Ra said. Okay. So that's the second way that they would have transferred their power. Third way would have been through military strength. There was certain fighting noble families in Egypt that felt that some of the families that were in power were too weak, and whenever they were sick or their families dwindled in number, that's when they would take over, and then boom, you have a new regime. Okay, and this is why there's so many different pharaoh names that we've gone over in school when we were growing up. All right, if anybody writing their notes, I'll give you one more second. All right, now back to the story. So going back to the xenophobia from this new pharaoh, um, they always ask, how did they forget Joseph? If Joseph was this big person who helped them in the famine, who made Egypt the big kingdom that it was today, how do you forget somebody that pivotal? Very easy. Just like a company that gets a corporate takeover, they erase old history, especially history that they don't agree with. We see that happening even in the world today. So, new regime comes in, they erased anything that did not look like Egyptian. So, Joseph, everything that he did, taken out. So now new laws, new rules, and with this new ruler, he takes it and he employs new rules to now enslave the Israelites. One of the reasons why they had the power to do that, like I said earlier, they sold themselves back to the Egyptians because they needed grain during the famines. Famine was a regular occurrence in Egypt now. And because the Israelites needed food, what they would do is, hey, if I already sold you my land, sold you my house, sold you my animals, the next thing I could do is sell myself, and I'll be an indentured servant. It started off making sense logically, and eventually, if you were still in a contract, or I'm an indentured servant, or I'm going to work for you, so for such and such amount of years, this new pharaoh took it and said, nope, they're all slaves, and he forced them into harsh labor, and that's how those cities were built in that time frame. Um, we get to going down further into chapter 1. We get into verses 15. We get to two special midwives, the Hebrew midwives, Zipporah and Puah. All right. Pharaoh calls them in and he says, hey, listen, I need you to pretty much kill, when the sons are born, all the male sons or male heirs, any son that is born to any of these Hebrew women, go ahead and kill them. And because they can't disobey Pharaoh outright, they were not going to disobey God. So they found a very creative way, and God protected them. So one of the excuses that they did when Pharaoh realized that these baby boys were still being born, He called him back in and said, "What happened?" He said, "Pharaoh, Hebrew women are built differently. As soon as we get there, they already had the baby. They don't spend that much time in labor. And once that happens, the baby's already born. Can't do nothing." So God protected the midwives. Not only that, he protected the nation themselves, and they started to multiply even more. This angered Pharaoh even deeper. And what he ends up doing is a decree where he says in verse 22 of chapter 1, then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews, you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. When that happened, it marked a pivotal moment for the Hebrew people because now it makes it hard for them to actually have their kids in peace. They had to hide. Now, give me 1 second. And I think Marion just joined us. Okay, cool. Um, so yeah, so like I was saying, when that happens, the blood of the Hebrew boys are in the Nile. Okay. And why is the Nile important? We talked about it back in the Joseph story. This is the economic basin for the nation of Egypt. Okay. Anything that happens has to go through the Nile. And if the Nile is destroyed or the Nile is not there, Egypt has no power. Okay. So now you're throwing the blood of God's chosen people into the Nile. We'll see how that turns out for them in the future. Now, we go to chapter 2, and Chris, actually no, Raven, can I have you read verses 1 to 10 on Exodus chapter 2?
Exodus chapter 2.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm, and you said 1 through 10?
Yes.
Okay, about the time a man and woman from the tribe of Levi got married, the woman became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She saw that he was a special baby and kept him hidden for 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she got a basket made of papyrus reeds and waterproofed it with tar and pitch. She put the baby in the basket and laid it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile River. The baby's sister then stood at a distance, watching to see what would happen to him. Soon Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her attendants walked along the river bank. When the princess saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby. The little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This must be one of the Hebrew children, she said. Then the princess' baby sister approached. Should I go and find one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? She asked. Yes, do, the princess replied. So the girl went and called the baby's mother. Take this baby and nurse him for me, the princess told the baby's mother. I will pay you for your help. So the woman took her baby home and nursed him. Later, when the boy was older, his mother brought him back to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopted him as her own son. The princess named him Moses, for she explained, I lifted him out of the water.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, just to break it down for you. So that this decree is going around, Moses' mother, after she has him, she hides him away from the public eye for about 3 months. After 3 months, of course, Moses is growing, baby, as they're growing, they get a little louder, they get stronger, you need space to hide them. So she was going to follow the rules, but she altered it a little bit. She put him in the Nile like she was supposed to. However, she put him in a basket. As we know in Sunday school, we always hear the basket story and Moses on the river. What she did was she put the pitch and tar with it, which makes it waterproof. And she put him in there and set him down. Through faith, she followed what God asked her to do and follow the rules. Cool. His sister, Miriam, watched him flow down the Nile all the way till he got to the palace where Pharaoh's daughter is taking her bath. While she's there, of course, like the verse says, she took pity on him. Some verses will say she had mercy on him. And from there, she takes this baby, she names him Noah for taking him out of the water or out of the river. And in this, she pretty much appeals to her father and says, "Hey, can this boy stay here?" All right. And in the same instance, Miriam, older sister, is walking up to the daughter and saying, "Hey, do you want me to go find a Hebrew mother to nurse him?" Because she didn't know how to nurse him. She said, "Yes, I would like that." Miriam, in that moment, actually negotiates a deal so that way Moses's mother could actually nurse him, watch him, and still get a chance to see him grow at the same time that he's protected in the palace. This is why this part of chapter 2 is very important because here is where we see the protection on Moses. Now, as he's growing up, we get a dual identity of Moses. Call him the prince. Okay. So he is by now, since he's adopted into the family, he is a Egyptian prince. Okay. So as an Egyptian prince, Acts 7:22 tells us he was educated in the wisdom of the Egyptians. So the way they did their ceremonies, even some of their mystic stuff, the way they do, everything from eating to strategic stuff in war, all that stuff he learned in the Egyptian palace. He was trained in leadership, strategic court policies. Okay. So, anywhere to how to rule a nation, he learned also in the palace. He was also granted royal privilege and unrestricted palace access, meaning there was nowhere that he couldn't go as a prince. Couldn't nobody tell him anything because by law, he is a prince. Okay. Now, on the other side, he's also still a Hebrew son from the house of Levi. He was nursed and raised early on by his biological mother. So, not only that, he also learned some of the things of his ancestry from his mother and sister. All right. So, even though he was still in the palace up until his mother weaned him off and she was no longer there with him to raise him, he still got a chance to know a little bit about his culture. He was able to grow with the knowledge that, hey, I am still Hebrew while I'm still an Egyptian prince. Okay. What this does for the kingdom is it puts somebody who can now be a double agent. Okay. You got somebody who is Egyptian by day, Hebrew by night. All right. He literally could play both sides and win for both sides. But we'll see how that actually turns awry. Now, we get to the breaking point for him. Um, when we get to chapter 2, verses 11 to 15. No, I take it back. Um, yeah, 11 to 15 on chapter 2. I will have Lynette, if you don't mind, would you mind reading Exodus chapter 2, verses 11 to 15?
Yes. I'm sorry, 11 through 15.
Yes.
Okay, I'm reading the NIV version, by the way.
That's fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. One day after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you the ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, what I did must have become known. When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well.
Thank you. Now, this is usually the story that we know in Sunday school where we hear Moses killed somebody. All right. Moses makes it to the age of 40. Reason why we know this, verse 11, he said Moses had grown up. Um, and then with some other text in the future, it will kind of show us that he was around the age of 40. But around this time, the curiosity of Moses, who wants to now attempt to go outside of the palace. Okay. Remember, Goshen was not directly a stepping stone away from Egypt. You actually had to travel to get to Goshen. Okay. That's where all the Hebrew were. So he decided, you know what, I'm gonna go see Goshen for myself. Okay. Finally ventures out. Can't nobody tell him no. And while he's there, he sees an Egyptian guard beating his fellow Hebrew. Now, because he knew that it would be wrong to do what he's doing, he looked left and right. He was trying to scope out the scene to see if anybody would be paying attention so he could do what he was doing. At this moment, Moses wanted to be a sort of hero or a vigilante in a sense. Um, some places will say driven by, justified rage. He killed the guard and he buries the body in the sand. Now, I may be showing my age. There used to be some cartoons back when I was younger. They used to say you never hide a body in the sand because it always gets uncovered. Now, this is exactly what happens to Moses. He buries the body, he hides what he's doing, and he goes back home like nothing ever happened. So, as he comes the next day, thinking, everything's okay, if rumor does get out, I'm the hero, I helped that man out, it's all good. He gets to Goshen, and when he sees two Hebrew people fighting or arguing amongst themselves, and he comes in and he says, we're not supposed to be fighting with brothers here. And they said, who made you our ruler and our judge? Are you going to kill us like you did to that Egyptian? At this point, we already realized his act was not taken as a good thing. It was taken as, hey, you're not one of us. You may share blood with us, but you don't live our lives. We're out here breaking our backs. You're in the palace. So as far as we know, you're just like them. And on the other end, he doesn't actually look at himself as a prince in the sense of being Egyptian. He still looks at himself as somebody who's displaced in the palace. He has the benefit of being there, but he's Hebrew as much as he knows. But on both ends, Pharaoh wants to kill him now because he knows what's going on. He's not going to be accepted in the house anymore. That princehood is gone, and his own people reject him. He has no place to be. And if he stays here too long, he will get killed because Pharaoh wanted him executed. So when that happens, we realized day one, the reason why he was able to murder that guard is because, again, that was the nature of the Egyptians. They had no problem killing or inflicting pain on other people. That's what he learned in there, which is why it was never an issue for him. But on the other side, being Hebrew, Now he's running in fear because, again, he just did something he wasn't supposed to be doing. This is what we call an identity crisis. So he flees and he goes to Midian. Now, if you guys remember back when we were talking about Abraham, we highlighted the name Midian because his descendants become the Midianites. And this is exactly where Moses is going to. Okay. So, and this is just to recap over all of this. In verse 11 describes him being grown, which implies he's an adult. In Acts 7, verse 23, this is where we get the age for Moses. Stephen, in his speech before the Sanhedrin, he claimed Moses was 40 years old when he decided to meet his own people or to go visit the Israelites. Okay, so this is where the age of 40 comes from. Now, what's very interesting about this is we see 43 times for Moses' life. And if you remember, we've always been noting every time we see a series of certain numbers. Okay. So we see the first 40 years of Moses' life. Location is in Egypt in the palace. Okay. He's being prepared in leadership, strategy, royal politics. He's educated. Okay. The second phase of his life, he spends 40 years in the desert. All right. They call this the Desert Crucible. So he's in exile in Midian. While he's here, he gets to slow down in life. He's being prepared. He's a shepherd. He's in the wilderness, and we'll touch back on this in a second. But the last phase of his life, another 40 years, is the mission that God was preparing him for, which is that going into the desert, the 40 years in the desert that we all know and love. But what I want you guys to see here with seeing these three phases, God took 80 years to prepare Moses to lead for 40 years. Okay. Now, when we look at that, some people are like, well, it took him too long to figure out. No. If we realize anything, this goes back to our prayer model that we talked about. When Jesus said, more time with God equals less time with man, we say the same type of thing being here. More preparedness, more time with God, more power to be out there to lead. God prepares Moses for 80 years, 40 for education, 40 to understand the terrain, and then 40 years to lead the people. So I wanted to give us a certain note. If you feel like the calling that God has on your life is taking too long to happen, just remember, God took 80 years to really focus and make Moses the man he needed before he let him actually lead the people in the desert. If God took Moses at the first 40 years of phase one, he would not be able to lead the Hebrews out of Egypt because he knew nothing about them. He knew nothing of their lifestyle. If Moses was never in the palace and only lived in Goshen or outside, he would have never had the power and authority that he would have had by being a prince to put them both together to be able to actually lead them effectively as a leader. So don't think you being in a desert or a silent time in your life or that dry season, don't think it's a bad thing. Sometimes God has to prepare you, and the preparation takes longer than the actual thing itself. So let's move on. Now, when we get to chapter 3, or before we get to chapter 3, at the end of chapter 2, after Moses gets there at the end of verse 15, Moses rests by a well, believing his story is over. Now, I know we had a whole debate, we had a whole breakdown of the wells from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob. And here we go again. another well. We know once we get to a well, somebody's life is about to change. So Moses is sitting here thinking, you know what? My life is over. Nothing's going to work for me. Nothing's going to happen. And we get a quick story. So, Chris, if you don't mind, can you read verses 16 to verse 20?
Hold on. Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flock. When the girls returned to Ruel, their father, he asked them, "Why have you returned so early today?" They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." "And where is he?" Ruel asked his daughters. "Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat."
Thank you. Thank you. Now, couple things. You'll see that over time from chapters 2 to chapter 3, Ruel's name changes from Ruel to Jethro. It's in the same way that we have Abraham's name going from Abram to Abraham, or Jacob to Israel, Esau to Edom. We have a name change in the background. So Ruel is Jethro. I actually got a text from somebody who said, "Isn't Jethro Moses' father-in-law?" Just wanted to clear that up. It is the same person. Okay. Um, but yes, moving forward, we have Moses actually protecting Jethro's daughters while they're trying to water their flock. Again, Moses hid and tried to be heroic in the past. That's why he looked left and right. Here, he's not hiding. He's doing it in the public because he has nothing to hide no more. He has nothing to lose. So what was done in the public was protected. And through that came some salvation for him. Okay. So Jethro invites this man into his house. And from there, we find out Jethro is a priest. Now, a priest from where? Well, since Midian is a descendant from Abraham, it's likely to understand that Midian would also have been following after God. Okay. And in the same sense, they would have the same knowledge that Abraham would have passed on to the rest of his sons, same way he did with Ishmael, so on and so forth. All right. So Reuel was a priest, and then later on, we'll see that he gives sacrifices to Yahweh, to God, and of course, his name being Jethro at that point. Now, while Moses is there, he gets to marry Jethro's daughter, Zipporah. And in the same instance, he has his son, Gresham, or Gershom, meaning I have been a foreigner in a foreign land, just to show the profound sense of displacement of where he actually is in his life. Okay. Now, while this is happening over here in verse 23 to 25, I'll read that for you guys. During those many days, the king of Egypt died, and the people of Israel groaned because of their slavery and cried out for help. Their cry for rescue from slavery came up to God, and God heard their groaning, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. God saw the people of Israel, and God knew. The Pharaoh that wanted to have Moses killed for what he did died. More than likely, it would have been his son that came into power. But one of the things that happens with pharaohs is if the pharaoh has a decree against your life and you outlive him, it is done. So now Moses can return back home at this point. He may not be liked, and they may try to find another reason to put him in jail. However, he is no longer a dead man walking in Egypt. Okay. Same time, the Israelites are crying out because now this Pharaoh is increasing their slavery work, the requirements and the things that they have to do. So as they're crying out to God, God remembers their cries and his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And now he's getting ready to send Moses back to deliver his people. All right. And so, like I said, there's no clear indication, but we do know this Pharaoh had to know Moses and of his Egyptian heritage because Moses was able to walk back there and walk into the courts. So, which is why it gives the indication that it might have been the Pharaoh's son. So, somebody who actually grew up with Moses. And that's also part of the reason why in the movie it's as if like it's his half brother. Now, going into chapter 3, we have the burning bush. Okay. I think this one was one of the most controversial parts of Moses' story. Can't tell you how many times I've heard this debated. Oh, Moses was probably hallucinating because it was hot in the desert. There's no way a tree or a bush or anything could burn for that long. It's actually interesting because in the desert, you would be surprised, lightning does strike. Even though it's a dry area, lightning does strike the bushes. And when it does, it actually does burn the bushes up. That actually happens a lot. However, that wouldn't have been a weird thing to happen to see a bush on fire. However, for the bush to not actually consume from the fire that's on it or be consumed, that's what makes Moses go, what is going on? So let's see, who else do I got in here? Raven, I'm gonna pick on you again. Can I get you to read verses 1 out of chapter 3 to verse 6?
1 to 6. Okay. One day Moses was tending the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led the flock far into the wilderness and came to, is it Sinai?
Yes.
Sinai, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a blazing fire from the middle of a bush. Moses stared in amazement. Though the bush was engulfed in flames, it didn't burn up. This is amazing, Moses said to himself. Why isn't that bush burning up? I must go see it. When the Lord saw Moses coming to take a closer look, God called to him from the middle of the bush, Moses, Moses, here I am, Moses replied. Do not come any closer, the Lord warned. Take off your sandals, for you are standing on holy ground. I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. When Moses heard this, he covered his face because he was afraid to look at God.
Amen. Amen. Now, um, so near Horeb, and as you see, we are at Mount Sinai. Some people say Sinai, but if you ever hear it, Mount Sinai, this is where they're talking about. This was in the land of Midian at the moment, and this is where close to where Moses lived. Okay, so he's very familiar with the area. Now, again, if you're writing your notes, I want you to circle Mount Sinai because we will visit this place again in the future. But this is a very pivotal place. Um, it is a very, I guess you could say, spiritual place for anybody who is Jewish or anybody who considers them to be Hebrew. Okay. Now, when God is talking to Moses and he is telling him, hey, take off your sandals. This is because where you're standing is holy ground. This is a whole different encounter. Moses could have ran away. Moses could have said, nah, I'm tripping. This is not real. This is not really happening. Instead, he comes closer. He comes closer. And as we see, as the conversation continues, we get a conversation between God and Moses, and he's telling him, hey, and this is from verses 7 all the way to verses 12. He's telling him, hey, I've seen the affliction that's happening to my people, and I've heard their cry. I know their sufferings, and I'm going to deliver them to the land of flowing with milk and honey. Now, most people know this is the land of the Canaanites. This is where Jacob originally lived, and he was with his people, his family, before they came to Egypt. Okay, so now they're going back home. Mind you, nobody in this nation knows what that land looks like. This is where Abraham, Isaac, Jacob all lived. Now they're going to return back to that land. Now, when Moses is talking to God and he says, hey, you want me to go back to the Israelites, and you saying that I'm going to go back to them and set them free, how am I supposed to tell them that a God sent me? This is him still learning the identity of God himself. And so when he says, what name should I give to the Israelites? And God declares, I am who I am. Now, when he gives the name and he says Yahweh later on, the I am who I am is also a title. Okay. In that time, whenever a God was going to give a message or a divine prophecy or something like of that sort, it would always say, I am Ra, I am Kipini, I am whatever God of this or that it is, and I'm telling you to do this or that. So God says, no, you just tell him I am who I am. I'm him. You know, not to be funny, but yeah, I'm him. Go tell them I don't have a designation. I'm not the God of water, the God of war, the God of this or the God of that. I'm the God of everything. So I am who I am. So this is where we get Yahweh from. Now, again, the correct spelling of Yahweh is YHWH. And most people will say, well, why is it that? Why don't we have any vowels in between? Well, because when God would have been talking to Moses and explaining who he is, even through name, he would have showed him that I am the breath of life. I am the reason why you guys are who you are. So, with that being said, when you breathe, you are saying the word and invoking God's name. When you take a breath, if you ever think about the sound of your breath, if you look like on the captions on the TV show, the sound of breathing is actually spelled YHWH, because the sound of breath is Yahweh. Okay, it's a breath. And not to stay too long on the Yahweh, but that's exactly what's the meaning behind the name Yahweh, the breath of life itself. Now, with this conversation and what is going on between Moses and God, he is telling him, listen, I need you to go to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. That's it. That's the mission. Just go to Pharaoh and tell him, let my people go. And as Moses is asking, so how am I going to do this? He tells him the strategy is you're going to go first to the elders of Israel to establish authority. Don't go to the youngins. Don't go to the people that you see first. Go to the elders. Reason being, they are the last line of defense, the last people who actually had any contact with anybody from the past that would have still been praying to God Almighty. Reason why that's important is because at this time, with the Israelites crying out to God for help, they're not just crying out to God, they're crying out to all the Egyptian gods as well. So God wants to break that down. He wants to get them away from the Egyptian gods because the Egyptian gods have no power. So to break them and wean them off of that, he says, go to the elders because they know exactly who. And even if it's still a little bit of that they know, at least if you tell them who I am, they'll know and they'll be able to convince everybody else of my authority. He also gives them a warning and he says, be prepared. Pharaoh will wow, I can't not easily let the people go. Okay. He gives some weaponry as well, some supplies. He's not going to let you go empty handed. And so God says he promises to break Egypt's will through a series of powerful wonders, promised land, flowing with milk and honey. And the guarantee is that you guys will be leaving Egypt carrying your wealth, carrying their wealth, and not empty handed. Now, why is that important? If we remember back to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, every time God said, as a nation, you guys are going to leave there wealthy as well. I am not leaving you guys without. They're going to literally hand you the money in your hands. Okay? Now that's the divine commission. I hear you, but I don't know if I'm the guy. Because really, what can I do? Who am I to go to Pharaoh? Pharaoh is the strongest person in the world right now. How can I go talk to him and tell him, let my people go? He's going to say, not only did you run away from us, you should be a dead man walking, and you're coming into the palace to even say, let my people go. Notice one thing. Moses never said that, oh, he's not going to let me in. Moses already knew by law, because of him being adopted into the household, he was going to be accepted into walking to the palace. He could do that anytime. So he doesn't even debate that. He just says, but who am I to go talk to Pharaoh? So he goes, all right, I'll show you this. To show my power and authority, the staff in your hand, throw it on the ground. And when Moses does that, it turns into a snake. And I'm explaining why a snake in a second. First thing Moses does when he sees a snake, he runs. God has to actually call him back and tell him, grab the snake by the tail. And as soon as he does that, it turns back into a staff. Even seeing that, Moses goes, all right, that's cool and all, but they still won't believe me or listen to me. I mean, I'm talking to a burning bush. Even he thought, they'll think I'm crazy. And he goes, okay, you want to see something crazy? Put your hand in your cloak. He puts it in his shirt, cloak, and he pulls it out, and it's leprous. Now, if anybody knows what leprosy is, it's like a whole bunch of blisters. Your hand turns pale white, no melanin. Very painful. The blisters themselves hurt. Even to move your hand, it's painful. And he puts his hand back into his cloak again. Hand instantly healed. Okay? Now, this is for him to say they won't believe or listen. All they got to see what happened to your hand, and they will have to listen. And even then, he goes back and he says, honestly, I want to do it, but I don't think I can speak because I have a speech impediment. This whole time, the speech impediment was never a problem. And yes, it's known that Moses did have a stuttering problem. However, this whole time, that was never an issue for Moses. Not once did he mention that him stuttering ever kept him from doing anything in the palace before. But because he's so scared, he's saying, God, I can't do it because of that. Find somebody who's a better speaker than me. He says, well, you know what? Fine. I'll find your brother. Your brother is an eloquent speaker. Aaron can speak on your behalf, but you're still going to be my stand-in. You'll be my prophet. He'll just be the voice. Once that happens, Moses still continues to doubt, and God says in the verse it says his anger is coming out on Moses because now he's getting annoyed. Moses, I gave you what you need to do. I told you what you need to do. I need you to go do it, and that's it. So Moses goes back home, talks to his father-in-law, and his father-in-law has to speak some sense into him. Tells him to go in peace, go meet your brother. And from that on, they take their trip and they return back to Egypt. Okay. Now, this is the last slide I have for you guys, but I want to explain the reason for the three signs that he just showed Moses. First thing, the Pharaoh's head, if you notice the crown that they wear, that little head garb, there's a snake at the front of it, at the top. Okay. The snake was the most famous animal in Egypt. It showed power. So when he told Moses to grab the snake by the tail and it turned back into the staff, it was to show power over two gods, Wadjet or Widget and Apep. Okay. Those are the serpent gods and the cobra goddess. Okay. So we got the serpent god of chaos and we got the cobra goddess of Lower Egypt, which was the one that was actually on the crown or head garb. This is what was a symbol of royal authority. But they prayed to these snake gods for their protection in the royal courts. With Moses grabbing the tail, it shows dominion over the staff, it shows dominion over the serpent. Because now I control the serpent and I make it go dead back to a staff. It has no power over me. So what that shows is, hey, God who empowers me to do this has power over your gods. So even over your royal priesthood, your royal authority, God has power over that. So that's a direct front from God against the gods of Egypt. Not only does Moses need to see this, but the Israelites also need to see this because again, remember, only the elders knew of God. The new generations didn't know to anybody who would listen to them and help them out. So this was how God was introducing himself to them and saying, hey, look, these other guys don't have no power over me. I have power over everything. So that's the first one. Second one is the leprosy hand. Okay. And God is challenging three gods in this instance. This is Shechem or Shekmet, Isis, and Imhotep. Okay. These are your gods of plagues, healings, magic for healing, and the god of medicine and wisdom. Fun fact, Imhotep is still the god of medicine that they use even in modern medicine today. But yes, God was demonstrating his power over disease, healing, and purity. One of the things about Egyptians, if you were sick, if you had any type of ailment, for example, if you had eczema, I have eczema, so if they seen eczema on my hands, I would not be permitted, even if I was a royal prince, I would not be permitted to be in the same room with Pharaoh. You have to be pured or purified before you can actually be in front of the king. So when this happens, God says, no, no, I can purify better than anybody else. So this is again another challenge. And the last one was the water and blood. Reason being is because you got three gods, Happy, Kum, and Osiris. All right. These are the gods of the Nile. God was declaring that your very source of life and economy belongs to me. I control everything. And one of the reasons why he changed the water. He told Moses, drop the water on the floor and watch it turn to blood. The reason why it turned to blood out of anything else, could have turned to wine, it could have turned to dust, it could have turned to anything else. The reason why he chose blood, because it's the same water that they threw all the Hebrew boys into. So the Pharaoh has to pay back for it in blood. Okay? So that was God challenging Pharaoh already right off the bat. What Moses doesn't realize, when he does these wondrous signs in front of Pharaoh, he's already saying, we're going to war. Pharaoh knows that because, again, Pharaoh is the prophet of Ra. He is the embodiment of Ra. So for him, he would already realize, hey, you're trying to make us look weak here. And since I'm supposed to be the biggest deity here, I got to stand up for my country, for my people. And this is what leads to our next Bible study, which will be the 10 plagues. All right. So next week, our story will continue. Moses goes back to Egypt, and we will be talking about the 10 plagues. So please continue with chapter 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. All right. Any questions? Any questions? Any questions? Okay. Well, thank you guys. Before we pray and finish out, Marion is actually going to ask the question of the day, since usually we do it at the beginning, but we're going to do it to close out. And then we'll pray and we'll be done for today.